All right, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's presentation as part of the Sustainability Speaker Series. My name is Mark Klapach Matthias, and I am here representing two of the coordinating groups for tonight's event, including the University of Wisconsin River Falls Sustainability Office and Hope for Earth. I also want to acknowledge and thank the River Falls Public Library for hosting tonight's event and the Library Foundation for their ongoing support to make events like this a possibility in our community. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, I want to share the next event with you in the Sustainability Speaker Series. On Thursday, December 5th at 6:30 p.m., Dr. Terry Root will be presenting on climate change, what we can all do to help. That event will be virtual only through the River Falls Public Library Facebook page and YouTube pages. Without further ado, I would like to introduce tonight's presenter. Angie Hong has been the coordinator for Minnesota's East Metro Water Education Program since 2006 and is the author of the recently published book, Exploring the St. Croix River Valley, Adventures on and Off the Water, which is available for purchase tonight. You can also find her on TikTok and Instagram at mnnature_awesomeness. As you may know, Angie has gone viral with some of her videos and has over 35,000 followers on Instagram. Her videos are educational and engaging, and we are so thankful she can be with us here tonight. Angie, it's all yours.
All right, let's turn this down to a shorter person's height. Hi, everyone. Oh, I'm so glad that you could all be here today. Is this an okay volume? Okay. So, in light of the fact that it is a dark and gloomy day, I just thought I would start with the very first paragraph in the book. It was a beautiful summer day. And the river seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. River, forest, water, sand. My 5-year-old son and I were balanced atop my brand new stand-up paddleboard, fully immersed in an epic outdoor adventure. The sun shone brightly, the water was warm, and all was right with the world. So I'm going to hold on to that feeling, and maybe you all can hold on to that feeling too. I have been an environmental educator for more than 20 years. And as Mark mentioned, I have been working over on the Minnesota side of the river, coordinating a shared water education program since 2006. And I have had the wonderful experience of getting to see things get better. So I hope that I can share some inspirational stories today amidst also ideas of just fun places and fun ways to get out and explore the beauty that we have here in the St. Croix Watershed. When I started my job, I came in with a background in zoology and natural resources science and management. And I got hired on, I had worked at Dodge Nature Center and a couple other local nature centers in the Twin Cities area and had all of this hands-on youth education experience. And one of the things that they suggested was, hey, we thought it would be fun if you had a column in the local paper. And it was all about water. And you write about it once a week. And I was like, like, that sounds really boring. I mean, doesn't it? Like, it kind of sounds like, how could you make it interesting to write about water once a week? So fast forward to now, and I have actually been writing weekly columns for the Stillwater Gazette and other local papers since 2006. So, 52 times 18, whatever that adds up to, it's a lot. So that was part of the impetus for me finally getting around to putting a lot of those words into a book, was that people were saying, wow, these, it's such great stories. And I started thinking, could it all fit together somehow? So this is how the story of the story begins. So the story of me writing a book is that for, 10 or plus years, people had been saying, hey, why don't you put this all together somehow and this becomes a book? And I was like, that's a great idea. And also I work full time and I'm a mom. So when the heck would that happen? During COVID, a lot of you, maybe things slowed down just enough in my life that I started to get creative again. And back in 2022, took a week off of work and I booked a cabin in the middle of nowhere in Pine County and up by the Shingwatana State Forest. If you have ever been there, you probably haven't because it's the middle of nowhere. But it was February and I booked this cabin in the middle of nowhere and I took a whole load of essentials with me, everything to get me from the morning through the day and into the evening. And I brought along my dog and my computer and that was it. Like everybody else had to stay behind. And I would during the day go out exploring. And so we've got here on the left side, just ice tumbling over the rock walls at Banning State Park. On the right side, this little muskrat that came along to greet us one day while we were hiking on the trails at Shingwatana State Forest. So I'd spend the day kind of wandering around out in the wilderness and, then late at night, trying to pull together all these little pieces of words and see if it somehow became a story. So 2 years later, it's a book. And if anybody is just, curious about the whole process of writing, it turns out that like the writing part is kind of the smallest part of writing a book, it turns out, because it was new to me. I come from the world of writing for newspapers when you write an article and you hit send on Tuesday and on Thursday it's in the paper. So having this kind of 2 years between when I sent them a first draft and when it went through all the editing and the draft and the layout and everything, I worked with University of Minnesota Press and then it finally came out this July. So there you go. It's a book. And all about it's a nature-based guide to the St. Croix region, but then also all about the different ways that people explore and enjoy and love this place. So, some of the stories of my own, and it's, going out and having fun in the river, going out and hiking or going out and snowshoeing. But then some of the stories are like, hey, I'd like you to meet Nora Olson. And she has 3 acres and she restored it to prairie. And, isn't this cool? So there's, just kind of a mix of stories and voices in there. So I am going to start now the story of the St. Croix by taking a sip of water here. Okay. I should have researched this ahead of time. Where does your drinking water come from in River Falls? Anybody know? Is it the Kinni or is it? That's what I'm guessing, that it was from groundwater. I know on the other side of the river, over in Washington County, we get 100% of our drinking water from groundwater. In the state of Minnesota, I think it's about 75% of the drinking water is coming from groundwater. And I can't think of a place where there'd be water intake from the Kinni, so I'm guessing it's probably groundwater here. Okay, so there's all this groundwater because a long, long time ago, we used to have glaciers in the area, right? So if we step back in time, like a very long time ago, we're stepping back, 14,000 years ago to when the glaciers were retreating after the most recent ice age. They carved the St. Croix actually preceded the glaciers, I should say. So there's a rift that was already there for millions of years. But they carved all these other little streams and left these dappled lakes and left these wetlands. And now I promised that I wasn't going to walk around and I wasn't going to walk over and gesture at the screen. So I'm going to use this red dot right up here. This is where the St. Croix River starts. So right now, we're sitting like way down here. We're almost at the very, very bottom of the river. But right up here in Solon Springs, if you were to go up and visit, there is this huge wetland complex. And what is so interesting is there's actually 2 rivers that flow out of here. So from the top of the wetland complex, there is this river called the Boise Brule, and it goes north. And it goes into Lake Superior. And then if you go down to the bottom part of the wetland complex, then it flows into the St. Croix River, which of course then connects to the Mississippi River and all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. And I just kind of think that's fascinating that you can go, and you can stand in the spot where the water is going in two different directions. And there's like a little portage trail right there that you can actually walk along as well. But our whole watershed, kind of the modern geology, is all very much informed by the glaciation. And I think people sometimes are surprised too to see how big of an area all of this land here all goes to the St. Croix River. So it's not just, a lot of times we think of this little stretch between Prescott and Taylor's Falls as being the St. Croix Valley. But, this whole area is all part of the St. Croix. So then there's another very important part of the story. And I'm wondering if anybody can guess what the very important part of the story of the St. Croix is. Electricity. It is electricity. It does have to do with electricity. So the whole reason that the St. Croix is now a designated wild and scenic river has to do with this power plant. The Alan S. King Power Plant, which is just south of Stillwater in Oak Park Heights, when it was proposed to be built back in the 1960s, people were outraged. People did not want to have a giant coal-burning power plant built on the banks of the St. Croix River. And a huge group of people advocated. They got Minnesota Senators Walter Mondale and Wisconsin Senators Gaylord Nelson involved. They carried it all the way up the chain. And as you can guess, they failed because this power plant is here, right? But what they did succeed in doing instead is creating an entire federal program, the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. And in that program, which was created in 1968, there were 7 rivers which were designated, and the St. Croix River was one of them. So 7 original rivers that were part of this Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. And the federal program now has several hundred rivers in the United States. And so all of that is because of this one little power plant. So I guess this is my story of how sometimes you get silver linings out of what can be, a pretty big failure or a pretty big disappointment at the time. And for their part, Northern States Power, which has since become Xcel Energy, they owned just hundreds of acres of land along the riverway going north of Stillwater up into the Taylor's Falls area. So today, if you go to Wild River State Park in Minnesota, this park would not exist if it weren't for the fact that that power plant was built, because part of the agreement for allowing them to build the power plant was that they donated this huge chunk of land that became Wild River State Park, and huge chunk of land that became Governor Knowles State Forest in Wisconsin, on the Wisconsin side of the river, and then quite a bit of land that is now National Park Service land as well. So if you go up to St. Croix Falls and you go to the National Park Service Visitor Center, all of this area is stuff that used to be owned by the power company. This is just from one of our family's latest trips along there a couple years back. But the one other thing I was going to say about the Alan S. King Power Plant is that it's set to get decommissioned in 2028. So I know. So Xcel Energy is, making a commitment that they're not going to have any more coal burning power plants in the state of Minnesota. And so there are 2 left. This is one of them, and another one is up in the St. Cloud area, and they are both going to get closed down. So it's kind of this big arcing story, that started in the 1960s, resulted in the Federal Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, a whole bunch of public land getting set aside for us to enjoy nowadays, and then eventually this power plant going to be turning into something else. And what it becomes in the future is still a question. So that's still something for the communities to figure out. Because it's a wild and scenic river, it has all sorts of protections that other rivers don't enjoy. And one of the things is that you can't build new crossings, you can't build new dams, you can't develop up to the edge of the riverway. And there is, even when you're looking at maps Like you see how there's all this green section is all stuff that is under protective easements with the National Park Service. So the majority of the riverway is considered a national park from, it would take me too long to get back to the original map again. But pretty much almost all of the Namakagon and most of the St. Croix River until you get down to Stillwater is all part of a national park. And it is all within these protections of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act. So my favorite stretch, because sometimes people ask me this, my favorite stretch is from the Log Cabin Landing, which is on the Minnesota side of the river, just a little ways north of, I don't know how many of you guys go, back and forth across the river. You swing both ways, both sides of the river. Okay, so if you're going north of Marina and St. Croix, and there's this little Crabtree Orchard garden store that you pass by, yes, and then you just have to know to go there. Because there's no sign to tell you, but you just have to know to go there. And you turn down and you could get your way down to the Log Cabin Landing. But the reason I love this is a super short stretch that goes down to William O'Brien State Park. And we will go and drop off a bicycle here or a couple of bicycles here. And when I say we, so I should back up and say, I have a lovely husband. He's not outdoorsy at all. He does not like doing this kind of thing. So the we is usually like me and my son and the dog. And when my son was young, what we would do is we would put one of those bicycles with, the burley attached to it down there. And we would, go up and we get on the stand-up paddleboard. And I have perfected the art of having all three of us in the paddleboard at the same time. That we go down the river. And it's a pretty short stretch, but tons and tons of backwater channels to play around in. And then when you get off here, then there's a little paved trail that goes all the way through the park. So you don't ever have to get onto the highway. And then by the time you're on a road, then it's just this little tiny gravel road that you don't feel. So, and then, the son graduated to the little tag along, and then he graduated to his own bike. And now he's 5 inches taller than me. So that's what happens. He's turning 13 in 2 weeks. So, but this is what it looks like when you get into those backwater channels, even though it is just, and 45 minutes outside of a major metropolitan area, outside of Minneapolis and St. Paul, you can get into these backwater channels and you won't see anybody. And so here we go. Here's what he used to look like. Here's what he looks like now. But, the thing that I think is great about the St. Croix River in particular is how much it changes. So how many of you are people who go out on the river yourself or have been out on the river? Yeah, it changes a lot from year to year and season to season. Islands appear and disappear, and channels appear and disappear. And so it's very different, in my opinion, from going out on a lake where it kind of always looks the same, and or even a river like the Mississippi or the Minnesota where there's just this very defined channel. But it's kind of constantly changing. And when you get up into the northern parts of the St. Croix River in particular, it's really wild. I mean, it's very much a wilderness experience up there. We have canoed or kayaked a lot of the stretches, and in some places it can be 10 miles between where you put in and when you're able to take out. So it's something kind of like going to the boundary waters that you really have to plan ahead and have all your supplies with you and have your map and, be prepared for being on the river for an entire day. It's not the kind of thing where you just kind of hop on and hop off. This is where I have to skip over the video, I think. But if you are somebody who loves camping, and you love getting out in the water, canoeing, kayaking, you should know also that there are National Park Service campsites all along the Namakagon and the St. Croix River, and they're all just free first come, first serve kind of campsites. So it makes it really easy. This is where we'll see, you can see the water. Okay. It's not horrible to see it without the sound. Okay. This is along the Namakagon River, and, just showing it to give you a sense for how it feels up there. Because It's very much like I said, you're up there in the wilderness, seeing lots of wildlife, extremely clear water. And the Namakagon, I didn't know that a river could look like that the first time that I went to it. But, just even looking at the map here, there are, these canoeing campsites that are all along the way. And they're rustic campsites, just like what you would find in the Boundary Waters. So you go in and you've got yourself like a picnic table and a latrine, and that's it. But he's not 13. Or I mean, he is now. He wasn't then. We'll skip right over that. So yeah, I encourage you, if you haven't ever gone out in the Namakagon or the St. Croix River, to try it out, because it's a pretty cool experience. Okay, so the river itself is obviously amazing, but there's more to the story than just that. So I have my prop number 2 here, and I'm wondering if any guesses? Any guesses from the crowd? Why I have this? Yeah. So a very big part of the story of the St. Croix has to do with logging, right? And I know that you are in the midst of a climate change and resiliency and sustainability series. And one of the things that I like to preface any conversation about climate change is by recognizing how much we've already changed our local environment. So when you think about the St. Croix watershed, how it was 250 years ago, it was old growth forest. And in the span of about 50 years' time, every single old growth tree was cut down. So this is like, akin to dropping a bomb in the watershed, just like this enormous impact. But it has it's so entwined with the story of how all of our modern day towns came to be, why Stillwater is where it is, why Marine on St. Croix is where they are, because these were the locations where the logs were floating down, where they had a mill, where they were pulling it off to process. I figured that this was probably a good place where I could stop and just read you a short excerpt from the book. Okay. Forests and woods. They say that trees can speak to each other in a language we humans are too busy to hear and too self-absorbed to understand. Peter Wollum, a German forester who wrote the now famous book, The Hidden Life of Trees, What They Feel, How They Communicate, has learned that trees in a forest actually live as a community. They maintain interdependent relationships and share water and nutrients through underground fungal networks. They send distress signals about drought and disease through chemical, hormonal, and slow pulsing electrical signals, and can also communicate through the air by releasing pheromones and other scents. While traveling in New Zealand in 2016, my family and I visited the largest living quarry tree, a 2,000-year-old giant known locally as Tain Mahuta, Lord of the Forest. Over the 2,000 years that Tain Mahuta has grown ever so slowly from a tiny seed into a behemoth tree 169 feet tall, the world has experienced the rise of Christianity, the fall of the Roman Empire, Western colonization of the Americas, Africa, and Australia, an industrial revolution, 2 world wars, and countless other changes. Does Tain Mahuta sense the enormity of change that has happened in its lifetime? Did it feel a mounting sense of loss as its community of quarry were slowly downed for timber? As every year the chatter in the forest grew a little bit softer? I wonder, too, about the solitary trees planted in city yards and rolling farm fields. Do they feel the same sense of loneliness in modern society that plagues so many of us? Do they long for a community of their own with which to share signals and sustenance? Maybe the tree in your yard could use a couple of friends. If you happen to be into old growth forests, however, there are a couple places where you can still find them. So, Osprey Wilds Environmental Learning Center in Sandstone, Minnesota, has some beautiful old growth white pines. This was formerly known as Audubon Center of the Northwoods, if you're more familiar with that name. And if you go up to Lake Namakagon in Wisconsin, which is kind of by Cable, there's Fairyland State Natural Area, which has old growth hemlock trees. So those are two places in our area, where you can go if you're into big trees, which I'm just going to kind of assume you all are. But in the book, I do have some recommendations on other places to go to see different kinds of forests. And the forests change a lot throughout the watershed. So when you're down in the south end, it's a lot of oak barrens and oak forests that are transitioning to become maple kind of forests, maple and birch forests. And then as you get further north is when you start to get into those more traditional seeming, pine forests and evergreen forests. I'm really excited about the way we've been able to engage the community in restoring a lot of these landscapes. And I think one of my favorite experiences in the past couple of years has been working with some of the schools in the South Washington County School District. These are some students that were at a school in Woodbury, Lake Middle School and Lake Middle School and Middleton Elementary. They worked with the Watershed District a few years back, took about 7 acres of turf out of commission and restored it to a prairie landscape, and then engaged the kids in planting 200 trees. So those trees got planted, I think it was 2017, and, have had about 7 years to get growing now. So it's really cool. If you go by the school today, you can see the prairie grasses are growing. 7 different schools in the district that the Watershed District has done similar projects with. Okay, so that brings me to the last prop that I have. Fancy one. If she was just like almost closer, I could tickle her with it. I heard somebody saying prairie grasses. Yeah. So prairie, super important role within the watershed as well. And I've got a dual purpose for this ribbon here. Not only is it helping hold my bundles together, but I am using it to help demonstrate one of the coolest things about prairies. Oh my goodness, I'm going to be leaving little blue stem all over the floor here. Stick with me for a moment until I'm done unfurling. Okay. Oh. Anybody have any guesses what my ribbon is? The roots, yeah, incredibly deep roots. So one of the things that makes prairies so amazing is, they've got cool grasses up top, but they have these amazingly deep root systems, which can go down 10, even 15 feet deep. And what this means is that prairies are really well adapted to really dramatic climate changes. So when it's really cold during the winter, when it's really hot and dry during the summertime, but also when there's fire. A prairie is a fire-dependent ecosystem. And when there is a fire, all of the grasses on the top will burn, and these robust root systems down below will stay alive. So a prairie actually comes back stronger after a fire. And these fires, some are natural, but, historically, there were also a lot of intentional fires set by people who lived in this area, because when you have a clearing, this is the place where the bison or the elk or the other large animals come to eat. And so I like to think of it almost as a reverse form of farming. Instead of building a fence to keep all the animals in, you create, a habitat where the animals could come and be easy to hunt. And this was kind of a sustainable way to have a source of protein and a regular source of food. In Minnesota, prairies used to cover a third of the landscape. In the St. Croix watershed, most of the prairies were down in this bottom portion. right around here. So you can still see quite a few prairies in this area. And one that I did just post a video about recently on my Instagram in preparation for this presentation is Kelly Creek Preserve, which is just over on the northwest corner of town, just a little bit south of Highway 94. Kelly Creek is, am I pointing the wrong direction? I got all turned around once I came down the stairs. That way. Anyway, it's the northwest corner. It's just south of 94. But Kelly Creek is one of the major tributaries to the Kinni River. Uh-oh. Here we go. It's this one. It's number 3 on the map. It's one of the major tributaries to the Kinni River, and just really cool because you can go and hike, and there's this beautiful restored prairie, but there's also cold water spring that just literally comes out of a rock. It's just a very, very cool place to see. So there's a lot of prairies kind of clustered down in the southern part of the watershed, but it is also pretty fun if you get the chance to head up into the northern part of the watershed. This number 9 is Creeks Meadow, and number 10 is the Namakagon Barrens. There's a globally rare ecosystem called the Pine Barrens, which is up in northwestern Wisconsin. And the best way I can describe it is it's like a prairie with little miniature pine trees growing in it. And most of that land has, like most of the prairies everywhere, has been turned under for agriculture. But you can still go up there and, have a pretty cool, pretty wild experience. If you were to cross the river and you head over to Afton, especially if you come in the beginning of June, you can see their annual herd of bison get released into the prairie. The Belwin Conservancy manages 1,500 acres of land that is mostly restored prairie and has a seasonal bison herd that comes every summer. If you went up to the Cedar Creek Ecosystem Science Reserve in East Bethel, they also have bison. Theirs are year-round, but you're less likely to see them because it's a larger area, and so they kind of go off and they stay hidden on you. However, when I was there, I was super surprised to find a skink. Like, did you even know there were skinks here? There's 3 different kinds of lizards that live in the area, and this little skink we found in the outhouse of all places. I had always known that skinks existed here, and I'd never found one before until I went to the bathroom. There it was. But my very, very favorite place to go find prairie is Standing Cedars Community Land Conservancy, which is just south of Osceola. And it's a nonprofit organization that manages this public land. There's 4 non-contiguous parcels, but the Inglewood parcel here has prairie, and there is a way that you can get down to the river eventually if you figure it out. And then the Buffalo Skull track has this just amazing, beautiful little cold water spring on it, and really cool geology, and a little tiny remnant prairie that they've also been expanding, restoring. So during COVID especially, we would just go and just spend the whole day there. It's kind of like getting to have a state park all to yourself. It's a pretty cool place. So a trend, I would say, in the watershed, if there's one theme, it's that change is always happening, but sometimes the changes are good. And a trend that I have seen happening in a lot of parts of the watershed is restoration of streams that were historically degraded or dammed. And y'all probably recognize this one, right? Yep, we got the Willow River State Park here. But we have a definite trend towards kind of rewilding our streams as, we're moving away from the lumber era and from the need to have dams and mills and things running. When I go out in the Kinni River, sometimes I'm dressed up ridiculously with my friends. I don't know what possessed us to think taking a stand-up paddleboard onto the upper Kinni would be a good idea. It was fun, but we got wet. I I'm sure that you've all been following, since you live locally, you've all been following, the plans to eventually dismantle the dams along the Kinni River in River Falls. And if anybody knows more updates than me, feel free to share. But from what I understand, things are have been, paused for a year or so while everybody's waiting to get funding. But this is just one of many dam removal projects that either has recently happened or is happening in the area. Kettle River, Minnesota, dams came down in 1995. Willow River, Minnesota, 2021. There's a dam removal proposed for the Grindstone River in Minnesota. So this is definitely a trend that's happening all around the area. Of the dam removal. And then the other thing that we're seeing a lot of happening too is rewilding streams that had been historically straightened and ditched. So one that has been really exciting for me to watch unfold has been the restoration of Trout Brook, which flows through Afton Alps and Afton State Park in Minnesota. And this is one that historically, it was an area that was farming. And then, of course, the ski hill was put in, and this little stream just kind of kept getting, moved and moved and moved until pretty soon it was a stream called Trout Brook that didn't actually have any trout in it. So in the 1990s, there was no fish in this stream. And when the Watershed District in the early 2000s and the Conservation District started looking at, how do we get this stream back to good health, they started at the top. And a lot of the places they were looking, it's like this. It's just eroded ravines filled in with buckthorn. And a lot of the early projects that they did, you might not even recognize as being a stream restoration project. This is an example of one of the farm fields that has a seasonal drainage that goes to the Trout Brook. And what you're looking at here is right when they were putting in a grassed waterway to help reduce erosion so that there's not so much of a ravine and not so much dirt going into the stream. So there was a good 5 to 10 years that all of the work happening wasn't actually happening in the stream itself. It was happening with upland landowners. And sometimes it was really fun. Like this couple here, the Veerlings, Philip and Becky, for their 20th anniversary, Philip got Becky a pair of goats and a llama, which I think is really sweet. But they restored a chunk of their land to prairie, and they actually convinced all the neighbors around them to do the same thing. So we have this whole group of people who put restored prairie into their properties. And little by little, the water quality was getting better, and that gave the South Washington Watershed District and the Minnesota DNR the opportunity to be able to look at the stream itself. And what you're seeing in this aerial photo, this is the most recent project that just got finished this year. This is where the stream used to go. And do you see wiggle, wiggle, wiggle? This is the new meandering channel that they constructed to kind of bring it back to its former wiggling self. Streams like to color outside the lines. Streams like to meander, and this creates all sorts of habitat that the fish need, that the insects that the fish eat need. It creates a place for floodwaters to flow out and, not have the stream get filled in with dirt. But anyway, little by little, the stream got better until some of the trout started finding their way back on their own. And I think this part's kind of fun. The stream is full of brown trout now that all came over from the Kinni. So they actually, because it's just right across the river. So the trout just, kind of swam on over from Wisconsin to Minnesota. And now they're over in our state park. But this spring, not this spring, just last month, the Minnesota DNR actually released a whole cohort of heritage brook trout, which are the native variety of trout in this region. And so they had 2,500 little baby heritage brook trout. And because the stream is finally back to good health, we were able to let them go. So they're all out there now. So if you go to Afton State Park, you can go look and see if you find some little baby brook trout. Pretty fun. But there's several other stream restoration projects that I know of that are happening in the area. In Stillwater, Browns Creek goes right through the town of Stillwater, and there's the Browns Creek State Trail, which is like a really nice paved trail that you can take and go all the way into St. Paul. But they're in the midst of doing a pretty major stream restoration project there. And then up in Marine on St. Croix, this is where the first commercial sawmill in the St. Croix watershed was built. And if you go up to Marine on St. Croix, there's the Brookside Bar and Grill and like a stream that goes right through the basement. That's because that's where the mill used to be. But they're planning some restoration work on this little segment of the stream that goes from between the highway to where the mill stream is. And if you go down by the river, you can actually see this like teeny tiny little waterfall and the teeny tiny little stream coming down to the St. Croix River. So just fun trends that I see happening in the area. We love our lakes, and sometimes we love them too much, but I see a lot of things to be excited about with the lakes as well. One is that we have, at least in the Minnesota side, been delisting several lakes in the past 5 to 6 years. So we had a whole slew of lakes in our area that got removed from the state's impaired waters list due to improved water quality in 2022, and another big slew of lakes that got removed in 2024. I think it was 80 altogether in 2022 and 2024 for the whole state of Minnesota. And, it's been due to a whole lot of work. It's been due to a whole lot of money coming from the state level, coming from the local level, a whole lot of volunteer efforts, a whole lot of city and watershed district projects going into the ground. What I thought was really fun, we had a Lily Lake delisting celebration. Lily Lake, it was 25 years that the community was working to restore that lake. Just so much effort went into it. And, it was people putting in rain gardens and people adopting storm drains and people adopting the rain gardens and people talking to their city council and people, demanding kind of like more be done. But when we had this delisting celebration, everybody came out, and what they're doing right here is we had this little piece of paper that we had the impairment listing, and they set it on fire. They were like, they burned it. But it's been really, I think, rewarding to see the community come together and have a tangible result. Because I think a lot of times with environmental issues, it feels like, oh my gosh, you're just going and going and going, and do you ever get a result? And this has been fun to finally see. Well, it took 20 years, but yes, we finally got a result. We finally have some lakes coming off of the impaired waters list. So I guess I don't want to talk forever, but one of the coolest experiences that I had while writing this book, kind of like as a way to wrap up, so it's like there was all these stories to be told, and then I had my list of places I hadn't yet explored and things I hadn't yet done. And serendipitously, I get a message from a friend on TikTok who I only know through TikTok, Goyden Indijnakas. He makes these great videos all about Anishinaabe culture. And he reached out to me just kind of, out of the blue and said, would you like to come wild racing? And obviously, yes, I want to go wild racing. So got to go up 2 years ago in the fall, and there was a big group of people from the local tribe, and then also people visiting from just all around the world. And, there was maybe like 20 of us total, and went out wild racing on the Moosehorn River. And so just thinking about all the different ways that people interact with the river, all the different people who think of the river and are like, yeah, this is mine. Like, this is my river. This is my wetland. This is my forest. This is my prairie. And thinking of just like the myriad of ways that we interact with the river every day, that it could be wild racing. It could be ice fishing. It could be snowshoeing, hunting, rock climbing. I think it's cool to me, how a river could be so special and have so many different meanings to so many different people. Okay, so I'm gonna do a final passage, and then we then we can, I don't know, do a Q&A. And I did not bookmark this one. Why did I bookmark all these other things and not that one? How silly of me. Talk amongst yourselves. You're all like, what would I say? Okay, here we go. I found it. All right. Sometimes you think you have a really good idea, like planting a vegetable garden at your office. Full of enthusiasm, you put your family to work and spend an entire day tearing out sod, piecing together scrap lumber, and hauling in dirt. It's hard work, but you feel proud. Then it's the next year. You think it will be easier, but it's not. This time it's only you, your kid, and the dog. Last year's dirt is rock hard and full of weeds. You dig, you hammer, you sweat. There's a truck full of new soil to unload and only a 6-year-old to help. But he does. He rakes the rich black dirt smooth while you shovel and haul one wheelbarrow after another. Shovel, haul, shovel. Finally, it's time to plant. That part, the long-awaited planting, is finished so surprisingly quickly. By then, the sun is set, you're covered in dirt, and the dog has ticks, but at last, the garden is planted. You can learn many lessons from a garden. One is that few things worth doing in life happen easily or quickly. Whether you're training for a race, raising a child, or trying to restore the St. Croix River, it can take months, years, or even a lifetime of hard work and relentless forward motion to succeed. In the example of a race, there's at least an end point at which your work is done and the long sought goal accomplished. Like most other things in life, however, the garden is never finished. The garden's an endless cycle of hoeing and planting, weeding and tending, preserving before the winter and then starting over in the spring. Planting seeds and harvesting tomatoes are the shortest, sweetest tasks in a never-ending, though worthwhile and satisfying job. Gardening also shows us how hard it is to transform the earth from one thing into another. In the still of the night, while the freshly raked soil lies smooth and brown, the weeds have already begun to creep in and take over. Maple seed helicopters spiral to the ground, ready to reclaim the garden as a forest. As the summer progresses, the edging cracks and the hand-painted markers fade. To preserve the garden requires constant tending. Even when we aim to turn the process in reverse, changing farm field back to prairie or restoring a degraded lake, nature seems to fight the transformation. Natural resource managers will tell you that it's always easier to protect a lake, river, forest, or prairie than to restore it to good health once it's damaged. The larger the garden, the harder the job becomes. The St. Croix River Basin is 7,760 square miles. That's nearly 5 million acres of land to tend. In 2004, the St. Croix Basin team set a goal of reducing phosphorus flowing to the river by 20% in order to reduce algae blooms and restore the river to good health. Today, the gardeners work hoeing and weeding, planting and tending. They plant rain gardens and buffers. They patch a crumbling ravine to keep sediment and nutrients out of the river. They convert perennial crops to pasture land. As in gardening, the work is never ending, though worthwhile and rewarding. The garden teaches us 2 final lessons. The first is that many hands make the workload lighter. One person can plant a garden, though it is hard and bitter work, but one person can't restore a river, and neither can one agency or one organization. When all levels of government work together and in partnership with Indigenous tribes, nonprofits, community groups, private landowners, and local residents, the garden begins to flourish. Finally, the garden urges us to teach and involve our youth. The kids will amaze you with what they can already do. Planting trees, weeding rain gardens, stenciling storm drains, and planning events. They burst in with new ideas and enthusiasm. If you show them, they'll learn how to sow the seeds and nurture the plants. Equally important, the garden will teach you how to trust children and hand them a rake and a shovel. So, there we go. I'm pretty sure. There we go. Are there questions? Questions from the crowd. And thank you so much for coming out tonight. Yeah. that you're writing about the environment? Yeah. So like I said, I've been writing. The question was, how is my process writing, and how does it differ maybe from somebody else's process because I'm writing about the environment? So, like I said, I've been writing this newspaper column weekly for many, many years, and in some ways, that forces me to be very, kind of have boundaries on what I what I write about. At first, I thought it would be challenging to think of something to write about related to water every week, and then as time has gone on, it's become less and less challenging because really water seems to relate to everything. But there's always a way to connect it to to gardening, to landscape restoration, to updates. But when I was writing the book in particular, I was like, oh, I have this whole collection of things. And so a lot of it was more like organizing, like, could all these be together? Which are my favorite? I'm going to cherry pick all my favorite things. And, like, how do they fit together in a way that's a story and not just a collection of essays? I set that down so I don't bump it. But I think having a weekly deadline, it's forced me to be really just like, okay, I don't have to say everything there is to say every time I write. It's just like, this week, I'm just going to talk about trees, or this week, I'm just going to talk about, how the Wild and Scenic River got started, and not feel so much pressure to, say anything and everything there is to say. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so that's a good question. So the question was about planting trees and also planting prairie at the school. So I know that they planted oaks in the area where they were going to, have the prairie. And then there's some places where they just planted other kinds of trees. And somewhat experimentally, they did also plant a few species that are native to slightly further south of here, with the idea that maybe as our climate is warming, maybe these species would be more better suited for being in the schoolyard. And ironically, then we had a couple of really cold winters and those ones all died. So I'll tell you that much. There is a little bit of conversation among like the conservation restoration community about whether we should be bringing, southern species further north for that reason. And that is a little bit of a cautionary tale. But yeah, they have done a couple of burns there, and I think they've just, if they weren't oak species, they just weren't burning in those areas. Yeah. At a couple of the schools, they have also been using, this wouldn't be for the prairie, but it's fun. They've also been bringing in goats. So one of the schools down in Cottage Grove, instead of, creating a prairie, they had a woodland where they were removing buckthorn, and then they've been using goats to keep the buckthorn from growing back again. So of course the kids love that, that they have the goats come and visit every summer. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's like, bossy pants. Why are you like this? I don't know. I know what I think is interesting too is that, and I can't tell you the details because I don't have it all in my head, but certain species communicate with one another and certain species don't. So there's like, there'll be like these, like in terms of interspecies, so like these two species of trees talk to each other, but they don't talk to this third one, which I just find fascinating, and I don't know why. Yeah. How did my relationship with the river change as I wrote? I don't know if it changed so much as I wrote, but I think it changed when I moved to Stillwater and when I had my son, because I had been working in the area for about 5 years prior to that, and I didn't live in the St. Croix Valley. I lived over in the South Metro and I commuted. And so I got to know the area as like a place where I worked, but not a place that I personally was like, it wasn't my backyard. It wasn't the place that I loved. And we moved to Stillwater in 2011 when I was pregnant. And after I had my son, then it was like, this is my new world, and I want to explore like every place. And it always seems like no matter what, like even though I wrote this entire book and still went to all these places that I'd never been to before, there's still more places, because every time I do a talk, somebody will come up to me afterwards and they'll be like, but do you know about this place? No. And there's always some new place that I haven't visited yet. So it's been fun, and it's doing it with Charlie. It's now it's kind of interwoven into just like watching him grow and watching him grow up, and his experiences and my experiences, changing in life, and how I related when I was in my 20s versus how I do now. It's very different. Yeah. 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 So if you have never gone before, I would recommend the stretch between Taylor's Falls and Osceola, because there's a couple of outfitters that rent kayaks and canoes. And so it's really easy to do it if you don't have a boat of your own, because they'll drop you off. You go floating down, they'll pick you up, they'll take you back to your car. And it's a popular stretch of river for a reason, because it's beautiful. You see these beautiful cliffs. It's usually pretty shallow water with lots of sandbars and islands to stop and play along. And then when you're up in the Taylor's Falls, St. Croix Falls area, there's just like lots of other things to do too. So you go to either of the interstate state parks, and they've got this amazing geology. And you can go to Franconia Sculpture Park and go see like the crazy art sculptures. And so it's this nice package. Like if people are coming, a lot of times people are like, hey, I've got in-laws coming to visit, and we need something to entertain them for a weekend. And it's like, oh, it's all there. You could kind of do a full package of activities. And for people who maybe they would like to get out on the river, but they have mobility impairments, or they're just not interested in going in the kayak, there is a riverboat that goes from Interstate State Park that you can just get on the paddle boat, riverboat, and have your little drinks and have your snacks. And there's riverboats that go out of Stillwater and Hudson as well. So those are all really great options too, if people are coming to visit or would like to get on the river and don't necessarily want to have to paddle a boat and get covered in sunscreen and stuff like that. Yeah. Yeah. That sounds so cool. Do you know, for the 10 days, like where did they start and end? Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Oh, that sounds amazing. And I know that, I mean, the camp is still there. And I know a lot of kids that go there for summer camp. Yeah, I was like, go for it.
Relate to lakes more so than rivers, but I know they like treat the lakes sometimes, especially like in the metro, against mosquitoes and stuff like that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so when like the Metropolitan Mosquito Control, they treat the local ponds and wetlands and lakes in the Twin Cities area. And what they use is, it's called BTU. It is a bacteria, and it affects the larvae of mosquitoes, biting black flies, and gnats when they're just in that larval stage, so they never fully develop into adults. And so they've done pretty extensive testing that it doesn't have non-species effects. Like it's not affecting frogs. It's not affecting even like dragonflies and other kinds of insects. But it's definitely reducing the amount of food available, so it affects the food web that way, but not in a way like sometimes people think, oh, it's a toxic chemical that they're putting in the water. And it's not like that. It's just that it's eliminating, this kind of like one layer in the food web. So it is one of the reasons that sometimes you would find like less diversity of species in general in some of the metro area lakes than you would out in greater Minnesota, greater Wisconsin. But don't fear that it's not like a toxic chemical. So it doesn't make the water unsafe for humans or pets or, any other kind of wildlife. I think, wait, I saw her in the back first and then I'll do you next. Yeah.
In relation to how just the community, the general population reacts to the work that's being
So the question was, what kinds of changes I've seen? And I honestly feel really hopeful and inspired because I feel like people are more aware and they're more engaged and they're more active than they were 20 years ago. Because I remember when I first started in 2006 that our office had just built a demonstration rain garden at the county fairgrounds. And that was like the first rain garden to get built in Washington County. And we gave tours of it. Like everybody came to see this one rain garden. And it was still like a new thing that I was constantly explaining to people. What is a rain garden? And what are these plants that we planted in it? Just the whole idea of landscaping with native plants seemed like this absurd idea. And now we have a project tracking database where we are just documenting the projects that we've somehow been involved in. And there's like 5,400 projects in that database, that have all been, and our database only goes back to like 2009. But just so many of these projects. And I've really seen that the interest take off and, it's churches doing it, it's schools doing it, or people are doing it on their own. State of Minnesota then created this Lawns to Legumes program where everybody in the state now can apply to get a pollinator grant of $400. And so it seems just like a growing interest. Which is not to say that there's not challenges still, but I don't feel like I'm very often having to explain to people that there is a problem, that, people are usually aware and happily. It seems to be still bipartisan, like it seems like I'm working in communities that are very much mixed communities and people are all supportive kind of across the board of what it is that we're doing. And, everybody cares about their river, their lake, their forest. So that's nice as well. What was your question? Yeah. No, I feel just so cheated that I have never seen a darn otter. It's to the point that I get mad when people tell me their otter stories. I'm like, why don't I get to see the otters? Because I love otters. I really love otters, but no, I never get to see the otters. I have heard just in the past couple of months that they've been finding fishers in Stillwater and Afton. So that's kind of exciting to be seeing fishers in the area. When we were on that Namakagon paddling trip, we, obviously saw like tons of deer. We heard, I'm trying to remember, did we hear? I don't think we could decide if it was wolf or coyote. I'm not sure that I know well enough to know. The difference in the howling. I feel like I usually see rather, I don't want to call them mundane animals, but nothing that people are going to be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you've seen that. Having my son along though, he is an expert at finding just like weird little rare species, so he'll be like, look at this, and he's just all of a sudden found a blue spotted salamander. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to report that because, that's like a rare species. Or we were at the boom site landing in the winter and he found a mud puppy, that was in like one of the little springs, which is kind of salamander that's fully aquatic. So just like weird little animals like that we'll find because of him. Nothing big and flashy though. Mud puppies are cool. Yeah. I was pretty excited about the blue spotted it was a redback salamander, not a blue spotted redback salamander. I was pretty excited about that too. I really like salamanders. Sometimes not everybody likes snakes, so I hate to say it, but I do sometimes see snakes and I'm usually excited about that. All right. Well, yeah. 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 Well, you've got the Kinni right here. So, oh, yeah. Yeah. And they're huge. I know they're huge. And sandhill cranes, they're huge and scary too. And I notice way more sandhill cranes than I ever used to notice. When I was mentioning that Crex Meadow earlier, the one where you can go to see the pine barrens, that's also really well known as a place where the sandhill cranes come in the spring and the fall. So you can go there and just see them by the thousands. There is so many sandhill cranes that come through there, but yeah, I agree. Like their beaks, they're really long. Yeah, they're very, very long and spooky. And trumpeter swans. Then I see a lot of trumpeter swans, which I didn't used to see those, 15 years ago. And that's been like a very intentional recovery effort on behalf of both the Minnesota and the Wisconsin DNR to bring the swans back. So, there are some pretty cool success stories when it comes to wildlife. But no otters. Dang it. Anyway, yeah. Well, thank you for having me. I did bring along books. So, like, if you wanted to buy a book, I'm happy to sell you a book. And I've got all the, whatever, the Square card reader and the Venmo and, checks, cash, whatever. It's all good. But yeah, you're welcome to bring a book home with you as well. And thanks for coming out. And thanks for all this stuff that I just know from this group of people. I just know that you are active and engaged and doing good work in your community. So thank you for being you.